Hello and welcome to this webinar series which is intended for folks who want to write a research paper, and a special welcome to fellows in the Author Fellowship Programme of the Journal of Research Administration. This project is supported by the Society of Research Administrators International, that's SRAI, in partnership with the UK Association of Research Managers and Administrators, or ARMA. This means we'll be talking about how to write research papers with a particular focus on the journal, and also how to work with peer advisors on the fellowship programme. However, you don't have to be a member of the SRAI or ARMA or part of the Author Fellowship programme in order to view and benefit from this webinar. And a special welcome also from the Author Fellowship programme committee members. They are Amy Kool-Shukers, Deb Derrick, Carson Harrod, Simon Kerridge and Georgia Kimball. They provide programme leadership and support for fellows and advisors. All are very involved in SRAI or ARMA and JRA especially. The presenter is Cliff Studman. I've been a member of SRAI since 2001, as well as being a research manager. I have also been an academic researcher, author, reviewer and editorial board member for several journals, including the JRA, of course. The overall aim of these webinars is to help people to write good, publishable papers. Our hope is that the webinars will help the fellows and peer advisors involved in the scheme to generate great papers for the journal. Each of the 4 webinars takes around 15 to 20 minutes. The 4 webinars. Part 1 is mainly about working with an advisor. It focuses on the Journal of Research Administration and its Author Fellowship Programme, or AFP. In Part 2, we want to provide some practical advice about how to write a paper. This covers things like getting started, writing blocks, language and style. Then in Part 3, we will discuss the structure of a typical research paper. This is about what goes where and what must be included. Lastly, Part 4 goes over the process and procedures which are involved in submitting a paper, getting refereed and getting published. The webinars will play continuously from slide to slide. We suggest you make notes as you listen to the webinar. If you want to pause the webinar or go back, you can use your computer controls. As you listen, note any key points or anything you don't understand. When you finish listening, if something is still unclear, talk to your peer advisor about it. Let us know if something needs clarifying through our feedback form, which is at the end of the webinar. You'll also find some practical exercises to try. We hope to provide the full text of the webinar as a PDF, which can be used to check back on something later. Okay, so let's get started. Our aims in Part 1 are to clarify the role of the peer advisor, just how he or she will help the author fellow and what the peer advisor can and cannot do. We will outline options of journals to write for and consider the JRA in particular. Then we will list the topics that the JRA covers and define the categories of paper that you can submit. We will also mention the style that the JRA uses. We're going to make some assumptions about you. We will assume you have a project in mind already and that you have some data and some results which you will be able to talk about. If you haven't, then we suggest that you should check first with a free webinar on the JRA Authorship from SRAI website, which deals with choosing a research project. And if you're a fellow, you should discuss your ideas with your peer advisor. Of course, we will assume you have a peer advisor or a supervisor for your research. If you're somewhere on the continuum between an idea and having data, then your peer advisor will help you move your project along. Next, a little bit about the SRAI peer advisors. All of them are volunteers and are giving time to help you with your paper. Just like all the editorial board members of the journal, they are doing this as a service to the society and to the profession of research administration. Most are working full-time in a research office, so you will appreciate that their time is very valuable too. I suggest you think about the scheme as a partnership in which the two partners, you and your peer advisor, each have very distinct roles. As long as you both do your roles, the programme will be a success. It will require time, effort and commitment from both partners for success, and the peer advisors have been chosen according to their experience, knowledge and specific expertise, together with their willingness to help AFP fellows succeed in publishing their papers. So, what will your peer advisor do? Firstly, he or she will help you to refine your project, to make sure that you are focused on something specific and concise. This gives your paper a focus and also enables the peer advisor to have a good picture of what it is you have done and achieved. Your peer advisor will answer your questions. Ask if there's anything that is not clear to you or that you are not sure about. This avoids confusion and time wasting later. If he or she doesn't know what, they will say so, and either find out or suggest how you can get your question answered. The SRAI is about helping one another, and the JRA editorial board can deal with most questions if the advisor is stuck for an answer. It may take a few discussions with your peer advisor before he or she understands your project. The more clearly you have thought it through, the quicker this phase will be. This seems to work best through one-on-one discussions by video link-ups. Your peer advisor may or may not be knowledgeable in your specific area. The aim is that you quickly become the expert, not your advisor. Your peer advisor will help you to plan and progress your paper. Initially, this will involve some direction, perhaps with regard to directing you to additional reading or research reports, or it may be on techniques to use in analysing data. Initially, your peer advisor may suggest various options for you to think about, approaches to take, or extra data to collect. As you progress your paper, your peer advisor's role will usually take the form of you sending drafts of sections and getting feedback from your peer advisor. The main purpose of this will be to ensure that the paper is well written and clear, and that all the necessary data is there and presented in the right place. What your peer advisor will not do. He or she will not be willing to write your paper for you. It is your work, not your peer advisor's, and he or she is not expecting nor expected to become a co-author. You won't get bad grammatical errors corrected. They will be identified, but it's your task to fix them. Checking references is a slow and tedious task. Your peer advisor is not going to do it. It's your job. Your peer advisor will inevitably need to fit working on your drafts into his or her already busy schedule, so try to be reasonable about your expectations on turnaround. So, what does your peer advisor expect of you? The most important thing is to keep in touch, even if you have not been able to make progress due to other commitments. As long as your peer advisor knows what's happening, he or she will understand if you have to delay a response. Try to check what you write before sending it to your peer advisor. Does it make sense? Are the grammar and spelling okay? You need to respond to the advice. Help your peer advisor out by telling them how you have responded, either in a covering email or with track changes, or both. Lastly, it's up to you to make sure that what you write is consistent with the journal's guidelines and instructions. This is especially true if you are submitting to a different journal. In summary, your peer advisor will want to focus on your content and structure and not on details, even though they are really important. Okay, so how do you get started with your peer advisor? First, it is good to make the initial contact via email and work out the best way for you to communicate. At the start, face-to-face meetings are the best, either in person or, more likely, over the internet. Use Skype or any other visual direct communication method, at least initially. This helps you and your advisor to get an understanding of each other. We all work better together if we have an image of the person we are working with and have talked to them live. Your peer advisor will get a copy of your application so he or she will have an idea of your intentions, but it's probably a better idea to assume no knowledge and to explain the project from scratch. This is also a good plan since your thoughts and ideas may well have shifted since you put in your application. You will need to tell your peer advisor if you have any particular things that you are sure you will need help about, and you will need to set goals and establish a timeline. At the start is a good time to talk about anything you're not sure of. You may have questions that arise from watching this webinar, for example. It's also good to talk a little bit about yourself, your interests, maybe your family or your background, and to get to know your peer advisor too. The more you know where you are each coming from, the better the relationship will be. It also helps later if there are family or work issues that might make it difficult for you to keep to a schedule on your writing. In the same way, your peer advisor will also have times when they are unable to respond quickly. You need to agree about how often you will communicate. As a suggestion, getting in touch by video conferencing once every 2 weeks at the start is quite a good basis for working together, but you and your peer advisor may want more or fewer contacts. As the project progresses, it may be less necessary to meet regularly and better to meet when there is something to discuss. You may even drop the video conferencing altogether. It's worth agreeing a format for meetings. I find a useful format is to ask the author fellow to drop me a brief email before the meeting saying how far they've progressed since the last meeting, how they addressed the points and objectives that were set at the previous meeting, and what they plan to do in the next period. Also, identify anything they need help with. Then at the meeting you can set new objectives. The author fellow could agree to take notes of what was decided at the meeting and email them as well. That's up to you. In the same way, both of you will have other things to do, so it's good to communicate with each other about how soon you can respond to a draft. But these are matters to agree between the two of you, and it really depends on how both of you want to work together. Initially, there are a number of things to decide on. These are selecting a journal, choosing or focusing in on the topic, and deciding on the category of paper. Let's cover these matters now. Obviously, we will focus on the JRA as our example. Other journals will have their own sets of topics and categories of paper that they accept. Let's check whether or not the JRA is right for your paper by talking about the JRA. So, why should you choose the JRA? The main reasons are: it is the top journal for informing colleagues working in research management and administration of new developments and findings. It is a fully refereed journal assuring a high standard of all accepted and published papers. It is available to all SRAI members for free. It is available on the internet and is an open access journal, so your work can be found and read as widely as possible. It is published twice yearly and has been operating for 50 years. There are no publishing fees, mainly because everyone who works on it does so voluntarily. Costs are absorbed by the SRAI as part of its overall operations. Of course, you may feel that your work should go in another journal because of its particular focus. That is fine, but remember that you can only publish a piece of work in one place, so you must choose your journal according to which audience you want to reach. Each journal has its own focus and will have different formats and refereeing systems. One tip is to consider which journals the bulk of your references are coming from and why. Also, remember that some journals charge fees for publishing. Whichever journal you choose, including the JRA, you need to do some key things. Above all, read the contributing author guidelines. These are downloadable from the SRAI website. Check out the style of other papers in the journal, so you get a feel for the way the journal is set out. Check any deadlines. JRA has none. And above all else, follow the guidelines. And here's a note of warning. Be very wary of journals that offer to publish your paper fast. There are many so-called predator journals around now. Their titles look impressive and they may claim many things. However, many of these have virtually no refereeing system and are not recognised by academic institutions. Any journal that promises a fast turnaround of your article, 1 to 2 weeks, has to be suspect. They generate income from the charges to authors and have little else to contribute to the academic world. Some of the worst ones make inaccurate claims about the readership, while some unscrupulous people have been known to use the name of a recognised journal and create a scam website. Your library may be able to advise you about this if your department is not aware of the problem. Journals that are very new are also risky, since they have yet to prove that they will publish regularly or that they will stay in business in the long term. Of course, the JRA is backed by the Society and is one that has stood the test of time. Deadlines. JRA is published twice a year. There are no closing dates for submission and accepted papers going to the next journal edition available. But you can still aim to meet a call for papers if they are issued for a particular volume. Other journals may have volumes in which they have a specific focus, and there will be a target deadline for submissions to those, as there will also be for conference presentations, especially when the proceedings are to be published. The next few slides list the range of topics that can be included in the journal's scope. As you can see, there are a lot of possibilities. These topics are drawn straight from the journal's guidelines for authors. From time to time, the list will change as new concerns arise. Indeed, your research may uncover new areas of interest. If you have a project in mind, you should be able to confirm that it fits into at least one of the topic areas in the list, but you may also realise that it impacts on other areas too that you might want to bring out in your paper. I'm going to read through the list. You can skip or pause a slide or move around the list without the sound by using your computer controls. Depending on your computer, to pause on a slide, click your page up button. To go to the next slide, press your page down button. To continue listening to the next slide, press the return key. So, the JRA covers all of the following areas. The role of the research administrator. Methods to improve research management. Sponsored projects management. Techniques to enhance the management of research, higher education industry partnerships, use of new technologies and research administration, knowledge management and information technology, research ethics and integrity, standards for the responsible conduct of research, regulatory compliance, strategic planning and mission development, organisational theory and organisational psychology, human resource management, procedures that stimulate faculty interest in research, research financial management and research law. But wait, there's more! Intellectual property, technology transfer, continuing education goal and programs and professional development for all personnel, globalisation of research, international relations and other timely projects that would be of interest to research administrators employed in the public or private sectors. So, as you see, the journal is very broad in its range of interests, and of course the last item is a catch-all for whatever is relevant to research administrators but hadn't been thought of before. The previous slides covered topics. Now let's take a look at the different sorts or categories of articles or papers that can arise from these topics and that can be published in the JRA. Just as there are many topics, there are many ways in which one can report a scholarly study. So there are several categories of paper that can be published. In practice, most articles fall into one of two categories. The first category is a research paper, where you have done a specific piece of personal research, which may involve some form of experimental study that you have conducted. For example, a comparison of two types of research administration structure, a survey of opinion, or a before and after study. It may involve bringing together and comparing information from different sources such as reports, statistics or other data sets, and trying to draw conclusions from the available information. The key factor is that the researcher is not a part of the subject under study and is observing or collecting data from the outside. The study is generally well structured and the resulting paper will follow a similar structured format. The second category, a reflective inquiry or practical case study, is also very common. A reflective inquiry provides background information and reflection on a situation that the researcher is actually involved in. The author will reflect on the experience, providing an evaluation of the solutions, or they will develop new ideas based on the experience. The contributing author guidelines of the JRA are worth studying if you are thinking of submitting an article in this category. The main points are: a reflective inquiry matches the analytic rigour of other methods of research inquiry, but the actions and decisions that arise are usually made in a single organisational context following sense-making processes. The results are not necessarily generalisable, but they are highly practical in outlining the knowledge discovery and decision-making processes. The study will usually arise from living through a problem of organisational change related to research development and/or administration. The paper will describe how the problem or issue was managed and resolved within that organisation. The value of the paper is enhanced when they provide analysis or synthesis of new ideas for use in other studies or contexts. A case description alone is not enough to advance knowledge. So, it is up to the author to reflect on the experience, do a literature research on the behaviours, provide some level of evaluation of the solutions, or synthesise new ideas based on the experience. What happened? And what were the outcomes? Could it have been managed better? What would you do differently next time? Other types of acceptable article are theoretical and conceptual articles, where the writer may suggest a new approach to an activity, literature reviews or scholarly critiques, which involve reviewing critically a range of papers on the topic in question. Reflective commentaries are articles in which the author responds to a previously published paper in the JRA or a periodical that the journal readership would be familiar with. Publication reviews, where the author will compile a report on a recent book or significant research program of interest to research administrators. Other types of paper, such as transcripts of roundtable discussions that focus on relevant issues, or articles based on interviews with key policymakers, may also be accepted. All these types of paper are discussed in more detail in the Contributing Author Guidelines, downloadable from the SRA website. So, we will discuss how to structure and write these categories when it comes to writing the paper later. So, quite a few things to talk about in starting to write a paper. However, it is a great idea to talk these over with your colleagues as well as your peer advisor. They'll be able to give you some useful suggestions and they will be more on board with you as the writing process gets underway. You could end up even co-authoring with them. Incidentally, some authors fear someone will steal their ideas if they share them widely. In practice, this is very rare, and the risk is much less than the benefits that come from getting inputs from others. Of course, it doesn't do to take such a long time in putting your paper together that others take over in frustration, which can happen, of course. But we aren't talking about commercial intellectual property issues here. When it comes to scholarly writing, most plagiarism occurs after publication, by which time you've got the credit anyway. Next, a word that may help you avoid considerable embarrassment later on. Just make sure that people who might have concerns about you writing a paper about a situation that might concern them personally are aware of your plans, and that you have their agreement or permission to write the paper. This applies especially if your paper concerns changes within your own institution, where there may be some sensitivities, or where there are intellectual property issues. Naturally, you will have to obey privacy rules and all ethical matters about confidentiality of information. But as a research administrator, you will probably be well aware of all these sorts of issues. In short, check out the stakeholders. It is best to do this at least twice. Once at an early stage when you have a clear picture of the overall content and aim of your paper. They too might offer some useful ideas and suggestions. The second time is when you are ready to send off the paper to the journal. Finally, it is important to note that while the journal is quite relaxed about topics and categories of paper, when it comes to the presentation style, things are very different. The journal has a very specific style which needs to be followed. For now, let's just say that mostly the journal uses 12-point Times New Roman. Footnotes and bullet point lists are not allowed. References must follow the American Psychological Association APA format, that is, authors named in text with year of publication and full reference at the end in alphabetical order. APA is a standard used by many journals. It is worth getting these basic requirements right from the start of your writing. Fixing these things up later can be a slow and tedious job. The journal also has clear guidelines about how the author's names and affiliations are to be presented, and also specific instructions about tables and graphs. These need to be followed when you're getting ready for submission, but don't need to concern you too much initially. A good way to understand the format of papers is to look carefully at how papers already published in the journal are constructed and arranged. Check out previous articles in the journal. It is worth pausing at some stage to consider whether a co-author would be a good idea. Someone who you can rely on to provide a significant component to the paper, maybe a work colleague closely involved with the project, or someone who can provide valuable technical data and advice. I've co-authored several articles with a statistician. They are great people, love to be recognised, and you will get priority attention. However, your co-authors need to be as committed to the project as you yourself, and this can be a problem. Co-authorship raises a few questions, and it is not for everyone, but generosity in sharing authorship brings its own rewards. If this is something that interests you, see the additional slides about co-authoring and the allocation of credit. That's the CREDIT system. You'll find them after the feedback form with a mouse click at the end of this webinar. Well, this is the end of the first section of this webinar series. I hope you found it useful and encouraging. Now, we would like you to reflect on the section for a little while by checking out some exercises and giving us some feedback, and then move on to section 2. We have suggested some exercises which will help you to prepare for writing. We would also really appreciate your comments, thoughts and suggestions for improvements for this webinar, and also for the entire series. We've included a brief feedback slide for you to let us know your thoughts. We suggest you copy the text into Word, complete the questions and email it back to us. Please give your opinion about the webinar by using a scale of 1 to 10 to say whether you agree or disagree with the statements. I suggest you use a scale where 1 is disagree, 3 agree a little bit, 5 is so-so, 8 is mostly agree, and 10 is agree absolutely. Part 2 of this webinar covers practical advice on writing a paper, getting started and formatting specifics for the JRA. Part 3 covers the structure of a research paper, while Part 4 describes the procedures involved that enable you to get a paper refereed and published. Exercises. You might need to print out these exercises and then tick them off one by one. Click forward to move on to the feedback slide. When you are finished, please complete the feedback form on the next slide. Thanks for your feedback. Once done, it is time to move on to the next webinar. And thanks for listening. Bye for now. I'm sure that as a research manager or administrator, you will have encountered researchers who are engaged in partnerships and collaborations. They are pretty much essential for any major externally funded project these days, especially if you're working internationally. When it comes to doing research, collaboration is usually a win-win option. Everybody gains. When it comes to writing papers, the same principle applies. There are real advantages in working with someone so that you do not have to do all the work, but you will still get the credit for a publication. So, as a general rule, all authors gain from writing a paper together with others. As a junior partner, for someone with an established publishing record, you will benefit from the experience of your co-author. There are a couple of practical details. You must be clear about the contribution each will make and who will be first author and who second. The same applies particularly if there are more than two authors, simply because in many journals multiple authors are referred to as first author et al. In the text. This may sound petty, but it is a reality of publishing and developing a track record. When it comes to recognition of your effort, universities vary around the world. Some unenlightened institutes insist that co-authored papers gain only half a credit each, while some insist on allocating a percentage effort for each author. This sort of pettiness is a discouragement to staff from collaborating, which flies counter to the institution's research policy in all probability. In my view, any author, within reason, should get full credit for a paper, although that also can be abused, especially where there are more than three authors. An alternative approach to awarding recognition is the credit system. That's CREDIT, Contributor Roles Taxonomy. This is a way of recognizing contributions to a paper that is beginning to get recognition in publishing circles. It involves 14 types of contribution of roles that a person can make to a paper, regardless of whether the person is named as an author. These roles are listed on the next slides. More than one person can perform a role or contribute any number of roles. If this method gets adopted, then it will be up to authors to identify each person's contribution to each of the roles. It's not as difficult as it may sound. So here is a list of the roles. We haven't put the full definition of each on screen, but this is in the text of the PowerPoint, or you can look it up on the web. This list can also help you to think about some of the tasks which are involved in a research project or in writing a paper. So the full list is conceptualization, ideas, formulation or evolution of overarching research goals and aims, data curation, management activities to annotate, produce metadata, scrub data and maintain research data. 3. Formal analysis, application of statistical, mathematical, computational or other techniques to analyze or synthesize study data. 4. funding acquisition, getting the money. 5, investigation, conducting a research and investigation process, doing the experiment, collecting the data. Six is methodology, development or design of the methodology, creation of a model. 7 is project administration, management and coordination, responsibility for the research activity, planning and execution. 8, resources, provision of study materials, reagents, materials, patients, laboratory samples, animals, instrumentation, computing resources or other analysis tools. Software, programming, software development, design computer programs, testing of existing code components. 10 is supervision, oversight and leadership responsibility for the research activity, planning and execution, including mentorship external to the core team. 11 is validation, verification, whether as a part of the activity or separate, of the overall replication, reproducibility of results, experiments and other research outputs. Visualization, preparation, creation and or presentation of the published work, specifically visualization and data presentation. 13 is writing original draft, preparation, creation and or presentation of the published work, specifically writing the initial draft, including substantive translation. And 14, writing, review and editing, preparation, creation and or presentation of the published work by those from the original research group, specifically critical review, commentary or revision, including pre or post publication stages. The source for this is https://casrai.org/credit/. Phew.